Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on boxing. This may be controversial to some, but hear it out, right? This is not a criticism, it's just breakdown of the facts. You can agree, you can disagree, that's fine. I know some of you will. There's a lot of fanboys out there that try to jam certain narratives down the public's throat. But let me know what you think. So pay attention to that, and I will be back in a minute. Day two of Typhoon Taiwan, and still no rain, not much going on. So, luckily, 2 days off, but not much going on, at least not where I'm from. Today, obviously, we're talking about Floyd Mayweather, and we're not talking about Floyd Mayweather's complete career. We're talking about Floyd Mayweather after he came back after his retirement. He left the welterweight division, which at the time was really popping, to go into retirement, only coming back once Manny Pacquiao became really a talking point in boxing. And at that point, he chose to come back, whether that was because he felt Manny Pacquiao was taking over boxing and jealousy and envy was, his motivation. As some people like 50 Cent and others say, well, it was maybe potentially a money situation where he'd spent too much money in the past 2 years and knew that he needed to come back and make cash through boxing. Or it was just his innate competitiveness that got him back into the game. It don't matter. The point is, we know, like Floyd told us during this period of time, this era of his career, that he was more interested in getting paid than he was in legacy. He told you that boxing fans didn't care if he got hurt. They weren't going to take care of him. So what he was most concerned about was making sure he had easy fights for big money. That's what Floyd said. We also see the way Floyd managed his career at this time as well, fighting twice a year on Mexican holidays to cash out for the biggest bag pay-per-view wise potentially in front of him. But let's get to it, and you can tell me what you think on this topic. So here we are, Floyd Mayweather, self-imposed the best ever. Whenever a guy names him the best ever, you can't really give him credit for that because that's something that comes from the fans, not something that you label yourself. It's kind of like Clarissa Shields right now calling herself the GOAT, right? These self-claimed nicknames. I mean, it shows you the true arrogance of many of these people because true greatness comes from people getting a name from the fans based on what they do in the ring. But let's move forward. Obviously, as I say, I recognize Floyd Mayweather as one of the best fighters during this era, right? Went on, had a great career. But some people fail to remember prior to his fight with Oscar De La Hoya, he was a secondary figure in boxing behind Tyson, behind Holyfield, behind De La Hoya, behind Roy Jones. Roy Jones was seen as the pound for pound dominant number one fighter in the sport of boxing and went on to become a heavyweight champion, just solidifying his greatness, going all the way from 160 all the way to heavyweight. Obviously, after the De La Hoya fight, it was kind of a new era for Floyd Mayweather. He became a pay-per-view success, right? Thanks to the Arturo Gatti fight, and then, of course, the Oscar De La Hoya fight. And then, obviously, Oscar De La Hoya even went on to promote Floyd Mayweather fights after that. So, they used the skill in promotions that Oscar had used in his career to promote and push Floyd Mayweather, and went on to put out great numbers, huge fights, made tons of cash, a lot of success. But the question is, as somebody recently said, it's not about how many belts you're winning. It's about the quality of opposition you're beating. You're only as good as the opposition you're fighting, right? So this is breaking down the opposition he was fighting at this time when he came back out of his first hiatus. So this is his resume when he came back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11 fights over the period of, quite a few years, right? From 2009 all the way to 2017. Obviously, a gap in 2016 in there as well. Um, before the Conor McGregor fight, understandably so. But the McGregor fight still has to stand because it's on his resume, and it made him reach a great mark of 50-0. Right? If he wouldn't have fought McGregor, then he would never have reached that mark, and he would be still standing at 49-0, tied with Marciano. But this is the resume: Juan Manuel Marquez, future Hall of Famer; Shane Mosley, future Hall of Famer, PED cheat; Victor Ortiz, a belt holder; Miguel Cotto, future Hall of Famer; Robert Guerrero, belt holder; Canelo Alvarez, future Hall of Famer; Marcus Maidana, belt holder; Manny Pacquiao, future Hall of Famer; Andre Berto, a belt holder; Conor McGregor, a novice. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 future Hall of Famers out of this 11 fight thing, which is pretty significant. One novice, which you never see in boxing at all. So that's not really the best thing you could put on your resume. And then obviously 1, 2, 3, 4 belt holders, right? And that's what they were, belt holders. So you're not going to get a lot of praise and glory from fighting them, because that's just what regular top level pound for pound fighters consistently do. So, what puts you above everybody are the elite fighters, the pound for pound future Hall of Famers on your list. But we're going to get into this and look at where were these fighters at this point of their career. What did they do prior to fighting Floyd, and what did they do after Floyd, right? Did Floyd fight these fighters when they were at their best, prime fighters? I know people say, well, Floyd Mayweather wasn't in his prime. Well, but nobody forced Floyd Mayweather to take 2 years out of his career to come back a little older and put on pay-per-view after pay-per-view after pay-per-view, selling greatness. See, that's the thing about pay-per-view. You can see when people are critical of Canelo Alvarez, they're critical of his opposition because they feel it's not greatness, right? And if he's not fighting great opponents, then it shouldn't be on pay-per-view. Well, that standard stays with everybody, including Tank Davis, including Floyd Mayweather. If you're not fighting great fighters, then you're giving us false advertisement. You're selling us an inferior product, right? But let's get to it. So here you have Juan Manuel Marquez, ended his career 56-7, never stopped. Pretty impressive. 1 draw, 40 KOs. One of the best Mexican fighters of all time. You can see he fought Juan Diaz, right, at 135 pounds, a lightweight, very similar to what Mikey Garcia did when he moved up 2 weight divisions to take on Errol Spence, right? This is a similar situation. Literally, Floyd Mayweather used a name fighter, but a guy that was 2 divisions lighter than him. And this is one thing people don't really point out when they talk about Floyd Mayweather. They don't point out the fact that he brought a fighter up 2 weight divisions. They love to talk about that when they talk about Canelo, who did it with Khan. They love to do it when they talk about Lomachenko, who did it with Rigo. It's a select group of fighters who get criticized for bringing fighters up 2 weight divisions, where a guy like Tank Davis can do it and people act like it never happened, right? Errol Spence can do it and they praise it because Mikey Garcia was going for greatness, right? We know Marquez was great, but this was a guy who literally, in his previous fight, had fought at 135 pounds. And then for the Floyd Mayweather fight that year, not down the road, but literally that year, both fights were in 2009, was brought up to 147 pounds, right? So, well, this is a great name. Obviously, a guy that's a future Hall of Famer. At this point, he was an unknown, unrecognized commodity at welterweight. He'd never fought at welterweight. He'd never beat anyone at welterweight. He hadn't even fought anyone at 140. He literally jumped up 2 weight divisions, of course, to take on a great pound-for-pound fighter for a career high payday, right? And for him, you understand his motivation. And for Floyd, you understand his motivation. He was not trying to fight any of the top guys at 147 pounds. He was fighting a guy pulling up two weight divisions who he was taller than, heavier than, longer than, and had all the physical advantages. So let's move to number two, Shane Mosley. This is the same Shane Mosley that had previously been caught on PEDs. We know that people love to point out the whole PED conversation now, but yet when they talk about Floyd Mayweather, somehow this topic of discussion is ignored and not talked about. This is what Floyd Mayweather did before and post Floyd Mayweather. Like anyone who was watching boxing at this time knew that Mosley was past his best. He still had fast hands and power, still had a great chin, but he no longer had very good footwork. He was easy to hit, right? He was in the Margarito fight. Yes, he beat Margarito, a solid opponent for sure. But this was a Margarito who literally just got caught cheating with glove wraps, right? So mentally, you know that he probably wasn't that confident, because if you're going in cheating, thinking you need that advantage, now you don't have it, and then you've been exposed to the public, obviously, that's going to weigh in on you. I'm surprised the fight actually was allowed to go through considering the circumstances. But Mosley looked great in that fight against a guy who's straight in front of you with no defense that just allows you to hit him. And with Mosley having faster hands, obviously he was able to get his punches there far more convincingly than Margarito. So it was a good win. But some people tried to act like this was the best win of Mosley's career. I guess they failed to remember the two fights with Oscar De La Hoya. Then, obviously, after that, Floyd Mayweather fought him, beat him by decision. And then we see exactly what version of this Mosley that Floyd fought. A guy that ended up having a draw against soft punching Sergio Mora, a guy that ended up getting dominated and destroyed by Pacquiao, who got very little to no credit for beating Mosley because he was old and shot. So he wasn't old and shot when Floyd fought him, but he was old and shot when Manny fought him. This is the consistent thing you see all the time, right? Lomachenko just fights George Kambosos. Oh, it's a shot, George Kambosos. Not like the George Kambosos Devin Haney fought, right? This kind of narrative consistently is used to praise one fighter for fighting somebody and criticize another. We see this with Bud Crawford consistently, right? Errol Spence faces fucking Sean Porter, got hit fucking a ton in that fight. His head swolled up like a football, right? Was lucky enough to drop Porter late in that fight to squeeze off a victory. Bud Crawford goes in, stops Porter for the first time of his career. Oh, well, it's not the same Sean Porter that Errol Spence fought. But then when we talk about Kell Brook, who just got knocked the fuck out by Golovkin, they don't use that excuse to criticize Spence beating him. They don't say, oh, this isn't the same Kell Brook that fought Golovkin. No, of course, now that's no longer the conversation. This double standard that people consistently use. I'm not pushing a double standard. You can clearly see that he was not at an elite level at this point of his career. Losing to Floyd, having a draw to Sergio Mora. He probably lost that fight, really. But of course, being the name that he was, with a Pacquiao fight in front, he was pushed forward. Losing to Pacquiao and not being competitive at all in that fight, and then losing to Canelo Alvarez, another guy who got zero credit for beating Shane Mosley at that time, even though this was a 21, 22-year-old Canelo Alvarez, and this is the biggest name on his resume at this point of his career. So you can understand why they had him fight Mosley, because they were trying to build him up into a pay-per-view star. You need name opponents. But for Floyd Mayweather, this was a fight that was supposed to happen at 135 pounds, right? Him and Mosley. At this point, after Mosley had already been in wars for the 2 years that Floyd Mayweather had retired, he was no longer the same fighter that he once was. And then beat Cano and then lost to Anthony Mundine, right? By TKO. Anthony Mundine, a belt holder. But let's move forward. So then we get to Victor Ortiz. Nobody ever felt that Victor Ortiz was a great opponent for Floyd Mayweather. People didn't even understand why this fight was being done. This was a guy who virtually quit against Maidana, right? And what did he do? Ended up having a draw against Lamont Peterson, right? A draw against Peterson. Beat Berto, who was an overrated fighter, overrated his whole career, right? That's what he was. He is the epitome of a belt holder. He is that version of Rolly Romero and Isaac Cruz, guys holding titles, but nobody ever thinking that they were great, never defending their titles, never doing anything significant. Then, of course, fought Floyd Mayweather. Uh, tried to kiss Floyd Mayweather, ended up getting TKO'd in that fight. It was a very pathetic display from both guys. Floyd even hit him when his hands were down, which was also a very bad look. Then he ended up losing to Josesito Lopez and then losing to Luis Calaza, right? Before he beat two guys with double-digit fucking losses to put some wins on his resume. This was the version of Victor Ortiz that Floyd Mayweather fought. And this guy was never at 147 pounds considered a top-level fighter. He was considered a top fighter at 140, an up-and-coming name in the sport, right? And then he fought Maidana, and at that point, people were questioning his heart and his mentality. And this fight only showed you that even more. The way fucking he was kowtowing to Floyd, hugging and kissing him because he hit him late or hit him with his head or did something, which was also dodgy. So not the kind of win that should be on pay-per-view or that people are excited about. So then we fight Miguel Cotto. Miguel Cotto, great fighter, future Hall of Famer, really good fighter, quality. He was coming off of a Margarito win, the rematch fight, obviously after Margarito beat him with wrapped hand gloves, and after Mosley beat Margarito, and after Manny Pacquiao beat Margarito, then of course Cotto beat him. So we know that Margarito at that time was shot, right? His eye was fucked up from Pacquiao and everything else. He beat him and then faced Floyd Mayweather. Did well against Floyd, but obviously ended up losing. Floyd showed that he is a great fighter by beating a quality guy in Cotto, who then went on to lose to Austin Trout, a belt holder, one of the best guys at 154 pounds, a guy who did more at 154 pounds than Charlo, or Andrade, right? That's just a fact. A victory over Cotto is better than any victory any of those guys ended up having. And then, of course, got beat by Lara, who was really the cream of the crop. And a fighter, coincidentally, that Floyd basically ducked and never tried to fight during this period of time because he knew he would lose to Lara, who was a similar fighter to him, but just naturally bigger and more primed. Then he faced Delvin Rodriguez, Sergio Martinez, who was shot, and then Daniel Gil, who he put a weight rehydration clause on him, and then obviously lost to Canelo Alvarez in a very solid fight, right? Where most people feel Canelo Alvarez underperformed, in truth, right? Most people feel Canelo at that time probably should have been much better than Cotto and should have stopped him, right? But Cotto, being game, did what he did. So it's still a good win. Out of all the wins we've talked about now, this would probably be the highest win that you would rank on Floyd Mayweather's comeback tour, right? The Miguel Cotto fight. Obviously a fight fans really wanted. This was also a fight that was supposed to happen earlier, prior to Floyd Mayweather retiring before this comeback. Obviously, Cotto ended up taking beatings against Margarito and Pacquiao prior to fighting Floyd. See, this is the one thing when people talk about Floyd was this age, acting as if age, the number, is more significant than the physical beating fighters took in those 2 years where Floyd was retired, right? When all these other welterweights literally were fighting each other. And you had that Margarito Cotto fight, which was fucking brutal for Cotto. Fucking other fights, obviously Pacquiao against Cotto, which was also a brutal fight as well for Cotto, right? So, Mosley and Cotto, these guys weren't the same as they were prior to Floyd retiring. They'd already been through the ringer, right? Been through the wash. But as I say, this is still the best victory by far. Then they faced lightweight Robert Guerrero. Robert Guerrero, obviously, the last time he'd been a champion was for a WBO interim title at 135 pounds, beating Michael Katsidis, right? Who he went 12 rounds with. Came back and fought two mediocre welterweights, right? In Ideen and then Berto. Berto was the guy. If you beat Berto, you got a Floyd Mayweather fight, right? That was the in-house PBC fighter you needed to beat that would elevate you into Floyd Mayweather status, right? We saw it with Victor Ortiz, of course, then we see it with Robert Guerrero as well. So Robert Guerrero also had a good story. His wife had survived cancer. So, that was a great story to sell the fight, just what is that? Something human interest story, right? So of course it gave you a good human interest story. But as far as a quality fighter, he was fighting guys in Michael Katsidis' level. Michael Katsidis, Aiden, and Berto were levels below Floyd Mayweather, right? Never would these fighters be considered great opponents for Floyd. And they were good, solid opponents for Guerrero because that's what level he was on. Guerrero was never seen as an elite fighter, a top fighter. He was literally what JB calls a belt holder, right? A guy that held a belt, right? You could market him and sell him because he had a title, but as far as being considered the best fighter in that weight division, one of the 4 champions, him being the best, that never was the situation, right? But he was an in-house PBC opponent who beat Berto. So it elevated him to a Floyd Mayweather fight because we know during this period of time, Floyd Mayweather was ducking Manny Pacquiao, right? Just like he ducked Cotto, Mosley, Margarito, Paul Williams, all these other welterweights when he retired from the sport. He retired when the welterweight division was hot and then had these fighters basically scrap it out amongst themselves. And then he came back for the scraps, right? And fought the guys that I'm breaking it down to you now. You can see the resume. You can see what this guy was doing before and after. So there's no surprise, obviously, that Tank Davis pulls so many fighters up because even Floyd did it regularly. Then you get to Canelo Alvarez, who was 23 years of age. You can see who he was fighting. Old man Baltimore, casual opponents, like not bad fighters, but not great fighters in Ndu, Hatton, Rhodes, Gomez, Cintron. Then an old man in Mosley, a small, mediocre fighter in Lopez. And then the first big fight of his career, a unification fight with Austin Trout, right? And that was the first big legitimate opponent that he faced, a world champion, undefeated, prime Austin Trout, who he beat, which obviously led him to a Floyd Mayweather fight where he ended up losing. Not by majority decision. Anyone that saw that fight knows he lost. But he is the epitome of a young fighter, untested, unproven, had name recognition, and had the Mexican fan base behind him. So Floyd fought him at the perfect time. It's kind of similar to what Canelo is doing now with guys like Jaime Munguia and Berlanga. He's fighting them before they get to their best. It's kind of similar to what we see people justify Tank Davis ducking Lomachenko, right? Lomachenko was a killer. Tank Davis was too young. They didn't want to risk him against that killer at that time. So even though Canelo lost, you have to praise him for chasing after the biggest, baddest dog on the block in Floyd Mayweather, who at this time was considered pound for pound number 1, right? So he felt he was the man that could knock him off the perch. It was not really a great performance. Obviously, he learned a lot from that fight, which, is what you take away from it. He became a far bigger star after fighting Floyd Mayweather, unlike any of these other fighters I just previously have mentioned, right? None of them went on to become superstars because they were all near the end of their careers, well past their best, right? So there wasn't much left in their careers for them to reach greatness. But for Canelo, obviously he was young and he learned from that fight and it transitioned to the rest of his career. So now this plays out as a great win on Floyd Mayweather's career. The best, right? You would put Canelo at number 1, Cotto at number 2, and then you'd probably have to put Juan Manuel Marquez, a guy that was pulled up 2 weight divisions, at number 3, because that shows you where the level of these other fighters were, right? So that, in a sense, isn't bad. You get a top fighter now, what not then, in Canelo, future Hall of Famer, Cotto, who had been a superstar fighter, at this time was past it a little bit, right? But still had that name recognition, right? And everybody understands that. Cotto was past his best, but still had name recognition to sell a pay-per-view. Juan Manuel Marquez went on to do great things after that fight, obviously beating Manny Pacquiao, losing to Bradley, right? So, some wins and some losses, but obviously significant for his career. Both fights, the win and the loss. But he was a guy that obviously had to develop into a welterweight. When he fought Floyd, he just come from 135 pounds. He needed to bulk up, add weight, get familiar with the 147-pound division, which is obviously what he did. Then we get to Marcos Maidano, right? Marcos Maidano, a strong punching fighter, a guy who is the epitome of a belt holder, right? This is a guy who lost to Amir Khan. Amir Khan, who was chinny as fuck, but Amir Khan was still able to outbox him. He beat an old Eric Morales, right? He beat fucking Soto Carras, because that's the level of opponent that he was beating. This other guy, Martin, 14-3-1, nobody knows who he is. Josesito Lopez, similar to Carras, right? Lost to Devin Alexander. You notice that everyone that beat him was a boxer, because he had slow feet. He was one-dimensional pressure fighter with power. If you could box behind a jab and had foot movement, you were able to beat Marcos Maidana, just like Amir Khan did, just like Devin Alexander did, right? Of course, what got him this fight was a cherry pick gone wrong. Adrian Broner, who obviously jumped up 2 weight divisions to become a welterweight champion, beat Paulie Malignaggi, a guy who was never a big welterweight, had no power. And obviously, Broner was able to beat him to win a title. In his first defense, he took on Marcos Maidana. So if he was a boxer, he should have won. But unfortunately for Broner, he wasn't a boxer, right? He wouldn't use his jab, his foot movement, and control distance. So, he was wrong for Maidana. He was a counterpuncher, right? Who was going to stand in front of Maidana and let Maidana get off. And Maidana ended up beating him, which was a huge upset, right? A huge cherry pick gone wrong. The best win on Marcos Maidana's career, right? Fighting a guy who they were trying to build up into a superstar, and they just ruined his career, because after this, Adrian Broner never turned into anything. Prior to this, people were talking about him being the next Floyd Mayweather. Literally, that's what people were saying, right? So then Floyd jumped in. Instead of letting Broner actually rematch him, which would have been better for Broner's career if he could have went in there, made adjustments, beat Maidana, like I think he would have in the rematch, then he would have went on to probably have a far better career and not be broken mentally. But Floyd took him on and underestimated him and allowed Maidana to actually look good in that fight. Some people actually feeling Maidana beat him, hence the majority decision. So Floyd rematched him instead of doing what he said he was going to do, which was let boxing people pick his next opponent. The people picked Amir Khan because stylistically, we felt that Amir Khan gave Floyd a different look than we've ever seen him in with, right? A guy that used a jab, movement, fast hands, and wasn't just a flat-footed, slow-footed Latino fighter who was right in front of him. But what did he do? He took on the flat-footed, slow-footed Latino fighter who was right in front of him. And then Maidana cashed out those big checks and never contributed anything to the sport of boxing ever again. Then finally, he fought Manny Pacquiao after 8 years of us waiting. Was it 8 years? It was a long fucking time, right? And when did he fight Pacquiao? After Pacquiao lost to Tim Bradley. Even though, if you agree or disagree, I don't think Bradley beat him. But the truth is, it was chalked up as a victory for Bradley. They talked about a Bradley rematch. Pacquiao walked away from that to do a Juan Manuel Marquez rematch. Went in and fucking looked great against Marquez, right? Looked great. Was busting Marquez's face, broke his nose, had him bleeding all over. It really looked like this was finally going to be the Pacquiao culmination fight, right? Which would really label him a star. And the question is, if he would have went on to knock out Marquez, would Floyd have ever went on to fight him? I don't think so. But because Marquez ended up stepping on his foot, caught Pacquiao with a great fucking straight right hand, knocked him unconscious. Pacquiao was never the same afterwards. Stylistically, he completely changed. He no longer was as reckless, as aggressive. His punch output dropped significantly. Went on to beat a very limited fighter in Brandon Rios, who he got no praise for beating. Then rematched Timothy Bradley, beat him, beat Chris Algieri, who he got no praise for beating. But yet you look at these guys. Bradley obviously went on to beat two future Hall of Famers in Marquez and Pacquiao. Algieri at the time was coming off of one of the biggest upset wins in boxing at that time by beating Ruslan, right, who was a huge puncher that people were actually saying Pacquiao should fight because they thought, oh, this guy could knock Pacquiao out because he'd already been knocked out by Marquez. So they were very disappointed when Algieri ended up beating him. And then instead of fighting Ruslan, Pacquiao fought Algieri, right? And you couldn't really be critical because you said he should fight Ruslan. Algieri beat Ruslan. So, and then after that, Floyd Mayweather fought him, right? And still, this is a obviously significant victory. Pacquiao even went on to become a world champion afterwards by beating Keith Thurman. So, you know, it makes it that much more significant. So when you think about Floyd Mayweather's post-retirement comeback, you'd have to say that Canelo was probably number one because it was a prime, young, unbeaten Canelo Alvarez. And then Pacquiao at number two because it wasn't the same version of Pacquiao, right? He'd just been knocked out prior to Floyd fighting him, right? You know, so mentally, you know, that had a huge impact. People go, he'd been knocked out before. Yeah, when he was at 108 pounds, right? It was fucking a decade ago, even more than a decade. So, you know, let's put that into context. That was a huge, very significant loss. Memes fucking filtered all over the internet. So you got Canelo, Pacquiao, Cotto, and then Juan Manuel Marquez, right? As really the four most legitimate fighters that Floyd fought in his comeback. Yet only one of them was unbeaten, right? Only one of them was primed, maybe premature primed, but still a guy that was at his best, right? And a guy that obviously didn't have all these reds next to his name. But still, beating Pacquiao, very significant, great win. Obviously, something that people never really even imagined. Because when Floyd retired at welterweight, Pacquiao was fighting at lightweight. He was fighting all the Mexican greats, Barrera, Morales, Marquez, right? He was doing his own thing, making his name, rising up the pound for pound charts, becoming a superstar in America. Well, Floyd was doing his own thing at welterweight. They were never really brought together. They were never seen as a likely scenario, right? People were talking more about Pacquiao fighting Venezuelan fighter Valero, right, who was a hard puncher and knocking everybody out at that time. So obviously, because Floyd's retirement, Pacquiao then obviously fought Oscar and then elevated himself into pound for pound number one and became, you know, now a target for Floyd Mayweather. Then we get to Berto, and people say, well, he did everything. He could cherry pick who he wants. So it's okay for Floyd to cherry pick this guy. Like, look at his resume prior to fighting Floyd and ask yourself, you know, is Canelo Alvarez fighting anybody like this? You know, Charlo was an undisputed 154-pound fighter. Sure, he went up two weight divisions, kind of like Marquez, but he was literally the undisputed champion. He was easily seen as the best fighter at 154 pounds. And nobody would have batted an eye about him going up to 160 and challenging champions there, right? It wouldn't have been an issue at all. Munguia, Berlanga, both undefeated fighters, primed, young, big, aggressive. I mean, we see Berto here losing to Victor Ortiz, beating Jan Zabek. The majority of you don't even know who that is. Losing to Robert Guerrero, losing to Jesus Soto Carras, beating Steve Chambers. You guys don't even know who he is. Beating Josito Lopez, who literally got beat by everybody. That's what his job was, to go in there and get beat by everybody. Then Floyd Mayweather fought him. Then he went on to redeem his victory against Ortiz and then get knocked out by Sean Porter. Right? You can clearly see that this guy, what's his most significant victory? A victory over Victor Ortiz. Right? That's the most significant victory in his career. I mean, didn't he just fight Robert Guerrero recently? I don't even remember who won that fight because I didn't fucking care. But this fight was not significant. He literally had 3 losses in his last 6 fights before fighting Floyd Mayweather. Floyd being the 4th loss out of 7. And then he got another win. So it ended up being 5 losses out of fucking 9 fights. So 5 losses, 4 victories in 9 fights. Far from the caliber of opponent you'd expect a pound-for-pound number 1 fighter and a pay-per-view star to be fighting, right? Canelo gets under all this scrutiny, but he's not considered pound-for-pound number 1 right now, right? He is top 5, 4, 5. Some people don't even have him on their pound-for-pound list, yet they want to hold him to this high scrutiny. But yet Floyd, who was literally pound-for-pound number 1, fights Berto, a guy that literally they had always planned on him fighting, which is why guys like Ortiz and Guerrero ended up getting fights with Floyd, because it was supposed to be Berto. Berto was always the guy in line that Al Heyman and the PBC was trying to maneuver into a Floyd Mayweather fight to give him a big payday. But he kept getting beat again and again and again. And even to earn the Floyd Mayweather fight, he got to beat Josesito Lopez, who was 33-6. But at this point, it didn't matter. And then to top this great career off, this second half career, he ended up facing Conor McGregor. As you can see here, Conor McGregor has 1 fight on his boxing CV. 1 fight. He was an MMA fighter who was pulled into professional boxing to allow Floyd Mayweather to get paid a lot of money. I don't hate on that. But the fact that this is considered a legitimate boxing match on fucking Floyd's record to make him 50-0, that, my friends, is a huge fucking asterisk and should never have happened. And boxing should never have sanctioned this fight. They didn't sanction Golovkin to fight Jaime Munguia, a professional boxer with over 30 wins, I think, at that point of his career, right? But they sanctioned Conor McGregor against Floyd Mayweather. Like, you can't make this shit up. It's fucking ridiculous. And people ignore it and act like it never happened. Whereas if fucking now there's talk about Canelo Alvarez fighting, what's his face? You know who I mean. The brother who's fighting Tyson, right? Can you imagine the outcry if Canelo Alvarez fights him? Yet it's the same thing. It's a fight that's going to be on his resume, and it's a huge money fight. But yet you're upset that Canelo is going to get paid a huge money fight against a guy who literally boxes, unlike McGregor, a guy who has, I think, at least 10 professional fights in boxing. Obviously, the level of opposition he's faced isn't nothing to get excited about, but this is a guy who's literally fighting boxers, right? Whereas Conor McGregor was literally an MMA fighter who'd never fought professional boxing in his life. But if Canelo was choose to fight him, oh my God, people would fucking lose their nuts. It'd be the craziest fucking troll session on YouTube. Everyone making videos, fucking kicking and screaming and moaning. But yet these people didn't mind Floyd Mayweather fighting Conor McGregor. Again, showing you this clear, blatant double standard that we get in boxing today. And then, this tells you everything you need to know. Floyd was not about legacy. Floyd was about money. He told you that, right? He once told you that, you know, fighting black fighters doesn't sell. Floyd told you that. People criticize Golovkin's trainer for saying that. I mean, literally, Tank Davis's trainer just came out and said the same thing. You notice when black Americans involved in boxing say that black versus black fights just don't sell, that somehow that's ignored. But when, of course, Golovkin's trainer echoes that, he's criticized and called a racist for it. I ain't saying it's true or not. I'm just saying, isn't it ironic that when certain people say it, it's not talked about, it's ignored, right? And Floyd said it. Floyd told you that he was about money. And what he did, he showed you that. By fighting on Mexican holidays, he told you who paid him. He literally told you who was going to pay for his pay-per-views, right? He wasn't fighting on Juneteenth. He was fighting literally on the 2 Mexican holidays because he knew Mexican fans would buy his pay-per-views and Floyd would get rich in the process. And that's what he did. He filled his pocket up thanks to fighting Latino fighters on Mexican holidays, knowing that that was the formula for success. He would play the black hat. He would fight Latino fighters that they would cheer for, and they would pay for his pay-per-views, and he'd fill his pockets and walk to the bank laughing and in glee, knowing that he was taking on the same kind of fucking tailor-made opponents time after time, low-risk fights, high reward, and he told you that as well. But people fail to pay attention to that. Yet these same people now are up in arms, in their feelings about everything Canelo Alvarez is doing. Yet, isn't Floyd the one that set the precedent? Isn't Canelo just doing what Floyd did? Right? He's going to fight Beterbiev 3 years from now. He don't need to do it right away. He's being like Floyd and Errol Spence, PBC. He's making that fucking fight get bigger by holding it off longer, right? But isn't it funny that when he does that, somehow there's an uproar? When Spence did it, people justified it. When Floyd did it, people justified it. When Canelo does it, it's the end of the world. But let me know what you think about this topic in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Peace out, everyone. Enjoy your upcoming weekend.